So continuing on with additional examples using the completing the square method to solve a quadratic equation. This is example 2, where you'll notice we have a quadratic equation because, again, the highest degree of any variable is 2. And we want to solve this by completing the square. So as we said, in step 1, what we'd like to do is get anything that does not have an x over to the other side of the equal sign, away from those terms that do have an x. So we'll have to add 16 to both sides. And 0 plus 16 is 16. So now we have to decide what is it that we need to add to this left side of the equal sign to make it a perfect square trinomial. So we take the number in front of the x, in this case -6, we cut it in half, and then we square that answer. So half of -6 is -3, and when you square -3, you get +9. Now remember, you'll always have a positive number that you're adding because anything squared is positive. But to keep the equation in balance, we must also add 9 to the right side of the equation. What we then have is x squared minus 6x plus 9 is equal to 25. So now this perfect square trinomial is going to break down into a binomial squared. Once again, we determine the first term by square rooting x squared. We determine the last term by square rooting the last term. And we determine the sign by bringing down the sign of the middle term. So we now have x minus 3 quantity squared is equal to 25. What we are solving for is in parentheses, and those parentheses are being squared. So we solve this equation by square rooting both sides. And remember, every positive number has 2 square roots, a positive and a negative. And in this case, the square root of 25 is 5. The square root of x minus 3 quantity squared is x minus 3. So finally, we want to solve these two equations. We have x minus 3 is equal to +5, and we have x minus 3 is equal to -5. So to solve, we add 3 to both sides, and one solution is that x equals 8. The other solution, when we add 3 to both sides, is that x equals -2. So let's do one more example involving solving a quadratic equation, because it's degree 2, using the method of completing the square. First thing we have to do is get this guy to the other side, because he does not have an x attached to him. So we'll have to subtract 21 from both sides. And we'll have 0 minus 21 is -21. Now, to complete that square, we have to look at the value of b, in this case 22, cut it in half. When you cut 22 in half, you get 11. Square that answer, and you get 121. So we're going to have to add 121 to the left side, which means we're going to have to add 121 to the right side to keep the equation in balance. What we now have is x squared plus 22x plus 121, which is a perfect square trinomial, is equal to 100. This perfect square trinomial will factor down to a binomial squared. The first term of that binomial is the square root of the first term of the perfect square trinomial. The last term of that binomial is the square root of the last term of that perfect square trinomial. And the sign in the middle is the sign of the middle term in the perfect square trinomial. So we have x plus 11 quantity squared is equal to 100. Now, what we're solving for is in parentheses and is being squared. So to undo squaring, we square root, remembering that every positive number has 2 square roots. In this case, the square root of 100 is 10 and negative 10. The square root of x plus 11 quantity squared is just x plus 11. So finally, we have to subtract 11 from both sides. And 11 plus 10 will be one of our solutions. And 11 plus negative 10 will be our other solution. Let me know if you have any questions.